Misdemeanors by TheloniusHowe. Sedestra was fucked. Every single one of the small ships on the concourse had armed guards. Because on a station that housed Vandals, every ship on the concourse would need armed guards, lest some wayward Vandal attempt to stow away. And that's exactly what Sedestra was. A Vandal. One of a species of thieves and malcontents, turncoats and opportunists. A species that was so looked down upon that, after the Repression Campaign, was stripped of their history, their identity, even their very name, only to be labeled as the galactic hoodlums. Sedestra had done everything she possibly could to break the mold. In fact, until today, she had never so much as broken a rule in her life. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. She was a Vandal, and the galaxy would only ever see her as a Vandal. So being visibly a Vandal on a deck of guarded ships and about enough time for a smoke before the customs security office caught wind of unauthorized personnel on the concourse meant that she was undoubtedly fucked. It wasn't fair, though life rarely is. She had near starved herself at half rations to buy information from her fellow workers. She had spent every last credit she had, begged, borrowed, and scrounged to bribe her level's caretakers in order to just get this far. And it was looking that all of that effort would likely be for naught. Right now she needed a miracle, a goddamned ex machina. She needed that. Guarding one of the ships at the far side of the concourse stood a being that she had never seen before. It wasn't like she was privy to all of the races in the galaxy, being as she was simply a factory floor worker that wasn't actually allowed to leave the station. But this particular one looked sorely out of place. It had no iridescent scales, nor colorful feathers, hardly any fur and no prominent crests displaying. Monotonous in shade, unadorned by biological markers, this creature looked absolutely exotic because of its blandness, and that made it stick out. The being seemed to be exhibiting behavior that also wasn't in line with its fellow guards. While most were familiar with the generally secure atmosphere on Aragol Station, they were lounging around, swapping stories or jokes. Some were even drinking. This one, while not entirely on edge, was more alert and cognizant of its surroundings. This would have to be her salvation. If it looked out of place, if it acted out of place, with any modicum of luck, it would be out of place, and therefore unfamiliar with the prejudices that permeated the periphery. Remember what Tem taught you? She thought to herself. Walk with purpose. Don't stop and gawk, it'll be too obvious. Don't dart, trying to keep to cover, it'll be too conspicuous. Walk like you belong there. It may just buy you some extra time. So she strode exposed in the open onto the concourse, one foot in front of the other, subconsciously wondering if she was trembling as much externally as she was internally. Not that it really mattered, though. She had a possible means of escape. She focused solely on the entity and the ship it was guarding. By now, some of the others milling about had undoubtedly noticed her presence, and she could feel the cold, hard glares driving into her skull. She could see in her peripheral vision other guards become more alert, moving closer to weapons, or simply staring her down. She did everything in her power to ignore the hushed whispers and overt insults that were directed toward her, lest they fully break the crumbling facade she was putting on. As she approached the ship, the being's attention snapped towards her. Though one of its two hands snapped to the pistol that adorned its hip, something entirely unexpected happened. In a friendly, chipper tone, it asked, "Can I help you?" Those were words that she understood. The fact that it was speaking to her like a person, and it hadn't spat on her as of yet, meant there may be a chance. "Help, please, yes." Her common was jarring and broken. After all, why bother teaching a Vandal common? It's not like they were able to freely ply the stars as most, or intermingle with the myriad of others that inhabited the great void. She knew enough to take orders for her job and to get swore at, but that was about the extent of it. "All right, I'll do what I can, but can't guarantee much. What you need?" Sedestra didn't understand about half the words the being spoke. She closed her eyes tight as she repeated what she had practiced. "Help, please, run." "Wait. You want me to run, or do you need help running? Or do you need help running something? I don't think I understand." The being in front of her cocked its head as it looked for clarification. "Help, please, run." The repeated phrase was all she could think to say as her mind began treading a dangerous line between hope and fear. A small commotion caught both of their attention. Sedestra's stomach dropped as she saw a group of customs and security officers making their way down the concourse, checking identification cards of those lingering around the ships. The being turned back towards her, raising an eyebrow and flicking a snap on the holster of its sidearm. "Help running, eh?" "No bad. We'll tell. No lie, promise." She was beginning to panic, to have gotten this far, only to be waylaid by a communication barrier and a simple misunderstanding that her crime was the unfortunate circumstance of simply being born would be downright calamitous. This statement seemed to relax the being slightly as its hand moved away from the grip of the sidearm. "Can work. Hard." Her eyes pleading with the being. She needed out by any means necessary, and so in an act of desperation, she offered the only thing she had left, the one thing she had managed to avoid in her life of indentured servitude. Her gaze cast to the floor. "Can do. Other," she added softly. The being recoiled a step at her offering. "Jesus Christ, dude. No." It took a deep breath in and narrowed its eyes toward her, its pupils running up and down her under a furrowed brow, as if to thoroughly analyze every facet of her being. It was searching for something. Its gaze seemed to penetrate her soul. Was it looking for malice? Sedestra held none. Resentment? While she certainly hadn't been pleased with her situation, she wasn't letting it weigh her down. Sedestra remained reticent while it executed this silent dissection of her soul. Finally, it placed a hand on its forehead, dragging it down over its face. Fuck. Flip's going to kill me." It let out a long sigh before continuing slowly, carefully. "Fine, we'll help. Ellis." It pointed at itself and then to Sedestra with an expectant look. She wasn't stupid, she knew this. Ellis was asking for her name, but that would be risky. The CSOs likely had a file on her, law-abiding or not. Revealing her real name could be the difference between a lifetime of what was little better than slavery or her liberation into the stars. However, she decided that a relationship that was to last, one that would free her from a life of bondage and servitude, could not be founded on lies or deception. So she doubled down on this strange entity being her savior. "Sedestra," she said meekly. "I don't know how much you can understand," Ellis said, shooting a quick glance over to the CSOs that were slowly approaching before shifting its gaze back to her. "But if you want out, you have to make it natural. Don't rush it, you're at the finish line here." Sedestra had no idea what was just said to her, so all she could do was give Ellis a blank stare. Fortunately for her, this excellent judge of character also seemed to have an innate ability to read emotions. "None of that, huh?" It took a deep breath, gently placing one hand on her shoulder while using the other to gesture toward the ship. Slow, steady, calm. As much as she wanted to charge the door and hide in whatever small closet she could find to get out of the prying eyes of the denizens of the concourse, Ellis was giving her the same advice that Tem had. It had gotten her this far, a few more slow, deliberate feet couldn't hurt. She hoped. She purposely took carefully measured steps toward the waiting ship, pausing briefly at the lip of the ramp. It was a simple thing, an austere metal strut and mesh device, but to Sedestra it might as well have been a golden gilded chariot of gods. She smiled to herself. She had made it. She was going to be fine. As she took her first step onto the ramp, a voice from behind her called out, "Security order. Hold Vandal." Sedestra froze. She had a foot on the path to freedom. She could almost touch the durasteel door that should be her deliverance. She could feel the tears begin to sting at the sides of her eyes. She wanted to scream. She was so close. Still, she had gotten farther than most, and if nothing else, would have a tale that may inspire others of her race to seek salvation in the company of those more amenable to her lot, not that the thought brought her much comfort. So she gritted her teeth and turned to face the officer that would likely be the end of her near adventure. And it was now that a most peculiar event unfolded. The same being that had earlier intercepted her had now placed itself in the path of the CSO. It used the same upbeat tone while having the same hand on the same pistol, asked the same question. "Can I help you?" The CSO's mandibles chittered. It clearly didn't like having its minimal amount of authority impeded. However, Ellis remained unfazed, simply making an noise to indicate the anticipation of a yet-received response. If a bug could scowl, it certainly would be at this point. Identification check, all foreigners on the concourse. As his vision shifted to Sedestra, he added with no small amount of venom in his voice. No exceptions. Ellis just gave an affiliative smile. Yeah, no worries. His still chipper tone had seemingly taken on an air of mockery as he held out his ID. The CSO took the card. Cooper Ellis Hugh, human, male, class D? When the hell did science ships get the budget for heavies? Ellis just shrugged, allowing the CSO to continue. Security and deckhand, lofty ambitions. Well, this seems to check out. What about hers? He asked as he pointed over Ellis's shoulder without looking up from the identifier. Ellis gave a half-turn toward Sedestra and blinked at her with one eye. Curious. You want Sedestra's? Well, that might be a bit, problematic. So she is one of yours? The CSO asked suspiciously. Yeah, she is. Probably lost her ID in that rat's nest she calls a bunk, which is why she's back at the ship and why getting it might be an issue, Ellis replied. Well, we had reports of an unidentified on the concourse, and my job is to detain any unidentifieds for interrogation and holding. Her being a Vandal adds extra probable cause. Though his words remained authoritative and unfriendly, since checking the human's identifier, his tone had shifted, if ever so slightly. She's a Vandal. I'll reimburse any damages she caused, make sure that she's reprimanded for her actions, and I will personally guarantee it won't happen again. Ellis did his very best to look apologetic. The CSO's antenna stiffened with indignation. No, she's a Vandal. Not a Vandal, you know. No, I do not. Ugh, Vandals, galactic lowlifes, common miscreants? The CSO paused, seeing the confusion plastered on the human's face. How do you not know what a Vandal is? You're serving with one. Are you dense? My guy, until 30 seconds ago, you obviously didn't know what a human was. I don't know what you are. Hell, I don't even know what Flip and Meryl are. Galaxy is a big place. I'm just security. I shoot shit that needs to be shot and punch shit that needs to be punched. I keep my head down and don't ask questions. Who? The CSO asked. Ellis just tossed a finger at the ship in response. The CSO brought up the ship's registry. Flip, Meryl, Aloevian bonded pair, proprietors of the lofty ambitions, Class A Xenobiology, Class A Xenobotany, Class B Linguistics, Class A, sheesh, frackin' brain cases. Watch it, they're my frackin' brain cases. Ellis cut him off, louder than was strictly necessary. A finger pointed menacingly towards the startled CSO. Look, I'll vouch for her if that means anything, he said as he gestured back toward the young woman. Sedestra can be a bit spacey at times, but she's good folk. If there's a fine or something, I'll happily pay it. If you really have to take her in, though. His fingers were now rhythmically tapping the side of the pistol. The CSO leaned to one side to look past the being that was standing between Sedestra and some serious time in isolation, and was likely considering his options. If this was a runaway Vandal, she'd be thrown in solitary, and he'd be rewarded with a good job from his command. If she was a Starship crew member, it could be a lawsuit and a loss of his pension. On top of that, between her and himself stood a high-grav heavyweight that had seemed to take exception to his existence, with a hand on a pistol. In the end, the risks outweighed the rewards, so he just shook his head. Nah, it's not worth the paperwork. Just do me a favor. She finds her ID or not, just keep her on the ship for the rest of your stay, yeah? I don't need Vandals running wild on my station. It's a bad look. Ellis let out a short chuckle. Yeah, I don't think that'll be a problem at all. The CSO motioned to his squad, and as they moved away from the ship, Ellis turned to Sedestra and gave a quick nod as he threw up one of his thumbs. She had no idea what the gesture meant, but for the first time in a long time she felt a faint glimmer of hope.